Hey there YouTube. So I wanted to do a quick video on what kind of expenses are tax deductible when you have an LLC. So I wanted to make this video because I saw another video where somebody was giving people really bad advice and saying, oh, if you want to deduct certain expenses that might otherwise be personal, just open an LLC, run all the expenses through there, and that's how you can get tax deductions for personal expenditures. Horrible advice. That's called tax fraud. The rules around deducting expenses apply to all taxpayers, right? So whether you have an LLC that's taxed as a partnership or an S Corp, or you have a separate C corporation, or you're just an individual and you don't even have a business entity, you're just a sole proprietor, the tax rules around what's deductible applies to everybody. Okay, within certain exceptions, but for the most part, it's a standard set of rules for all taxpayers. So the first issue is, if you want to take tax deductions for expenses, you have to have a business. You can't just open an entity and then run costs through there, expecting to get tax write-offs for them. So the first issue is always, whether you have an LLC or not, the question is, are you actively engaged in a trade or business? And if so, you can deduct ordinary and necessary expenses in connection with that trade or business, right? The expenses are deductible under Section 162 of the code. It's very important that the business be for profit, right? It has to have a for-profit motive. And so the IRS is very clear that, look, if you've got some type of operation where you're making a little money, but it's a hobby, the hobby loss rules apply, right? So if it's a hobby, whether that's in an LLC or not. I've seen a lot of hobbies in LLCs because there's not that for-profit motive push. You're not actually running a business. If it's a hobby, you can deduct costs, right, that you incurred in making whatever product or service you were providing, but you can't create a loss, right? So any hobby expenses can only be used to offset any hobby income you earned, and then that's it. Whereas if you're running a trade or business, you can basically deduct costs in excess of your revenue, right? If your business is running at a loss, you can deduct those excess expenses. And again, just to touch on personal expenses, tax code is very clear. A personal expense under Section 162 is not deductible, okay? Where it gets a little tricky is when you have, expenses that might be 50-50 or kind of a hybrid cost. And the example I have down here is travel expenses for business. I see this abused so often, and the IRS absolutely loves to challenge this because they win almost every time. Everybody that is an entrepreneur and wants to travel for their business, when really it's just a vacation, they get caught up in just running all the expenses through, not allocating a portion to the personal use. And the IRS wins. So if you can't 100% substantiate that the principal purpose of the trip was for business, and you're only deducting the business portion, then you're at risk for an audit and a reversal of those costs. So the IRS is going to hammer you. The best thing to read up on to get more information on these is the IRS publication 463. That does a pretty good job at outlining examples on, what can be deducted if there's kind of a hybrid component. So if you do have a trip for business, but then you stick around a couple days after for vacation, how do you go about bifurcating those costs and deducting the business portion and then not deducting the personal portion? You can still have the company pay for the personal portion of the trip, right? That's fine. It's just when you do your taxes, the personal portion is a non-deductible, basically an M1 reversal, right? So if you're thinking about how, let's say meals, for example, meals are only 50% deductible. And so when you look at your K-1 or your tax return, you see the deduction for half the cost, and then there's that permanent difference where it says, look, this is a non-deductible expense. That's effectively what the reporting looks like if you have a personal portion of a trip being paid for by your company. So I think that the takeaway here is be very careful when you are deducting costs inside a company. You really want to make sure that they are for the business, right? It has to be ordinary and necessary, right? Necessary being the key point there, right? It's got to be principally incurred to further the business enterprise, right? If it's a holiday for an owner, it's going to be tough to argue that that's an ordinary and necessary cost in furtherance of the business enterprise itself. So that covers it. If you have any questions, feel free to leave me a comment below. Happy to answer them. And like always, definitely appreciate a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. And I hope to see you again soon. Thank you.